Part 1, Chapter 3 of Short History of the Christian Church by John Fletcher Hurst. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3. The Greek and Roman Conditions. The pagan literature, in the earliest period of Christianity, was a beautiful piece of human workmanship. No temple in stone was so symmetrical and elaborate as that of Greek and Roman letters. From rude beginnings, it had grown into such majestic and firm proportions that, to this day, it challenges the admiration of the world. The classic achievements in the whole field of literature, art, philosophy, and legislation are the common inheritance of man. When Christianity came forward with its strange claims upon the confidence of men, there was but little in its exterior which could awaken sympathy. The most despised land had produced it. Its founder had suffered death on the ignominious cross. Its first apostles were of humble origin, and, with the exception of Paul, not one had drunk at the classic fountains. That a new faith, with such multiform disadvantages, should venture upon such a hostile field, where the literature and traditions of many centuries held firm ground, seemed a hopeless task. But the heroism of the first preachers of Christianity was not disturbed by the number or strength of the enemy. The promise of success was the basis of their faith. They wrought on, and expected triumph over every foe. Which should win, the obscure Christian, who had never fought a battle, or the cultivated pagan, who had never lost one? The path of the Greek to mastery had been through all fields of intellectual development. Out of the old Pelasgic cradle he had grown to the full grandeur of Attic manhood. The blood of many tribes flowed through his veins, and he had absorbed the strongest and best elements of all. In epic and dramatic poetry he produced Homer, Hesiod, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. The Greek was a lover of form and color. He caught his inspiration from the wild and beautiful scenery of his islands and broken coast. Apelles and Phidias became the incarnation of his passion. In his long battle for federation he had produced such great lawgivers as Solon and Lycurgus. He was of fervent temperament, and, living always in a feverish political atmosphere, he had developed Demosthenes, Aeschines, and Isocrates, orators who have swayed audiences in all later ages. In philosophy the Greeks labored with great industry. The growth of their systems was contemporaneous with their national prosperity. The dealing with the fundamental questions of human being and destiny by Socrates and Plato reveals a deep moral purpose. There are two great periods of Greek philosophy separated by the downfall of Alexander's empire. The former extends from B.C. 600 to B.C. 324. Within this short space arose all the best thinkers, who founded the Ionic, the early Pythagorean, the Eleatic, the Atomistic, and the Sophist schools. The culmination was reached in the three systems of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The second period extends from B.C. 324 to A.D. 530. The schools of the Decadents rose and fell at this time, the Stoics, the Epicureans, and the Skeptics. To this was added Neoplatonism, founded by Plotinus. The most spiritual of the entire circle of Greek philosophers was Plato. In many departments of his philosophy, such as the unity and spirituality of God and the immortality of the soul, he made, though unconsciously, very near approaches to the truths of revelation. It was the habit of early Christian teachers to regard his system as kindred to Christianity. Eusebius said, "Plato alone of all the Greeks reached the vestibule of truth and stood upon its threshold." Justin Martyr, Clemens of Alexandria, Origen, and Augustine, in the early period, and Schleiermacher and Neander in the recent period, were led to Christ through Plato as their guide. The best systems in the group declined with the political supremacy of the Greek Confederation. Those which succeeded the loss of national independence were the systems of despair. When Christianity arose, the prevailing Greek philosophy was skeptical. The mythology had lost its firm hold, while philosophy, which was the substitute offered by the profoundest thinkers, proved its own inability to satisfy the cravings of the soul for salvation and to be the solution of its great problems. Pagan faith and thought were unavailing to meet the spiritual wants of man. The soul could not live on the triumphs of art or literature or eloquence or legislation. Christianity came forward with its sublime truths and made proffer of them to the world. Paul, preaching Christ on Mars Hill, looked back upon a long pathway of dead systems of Greek genius, and forward upon the rise of Christian creations in their place. Great as had been the thinkers of the Stoa and the Academy, greater still was the messenger of Christ. His system was the permanent truth. When Christianity began its career for the world's possession, the Roman rule was universal. The literature and religion were shaped from Greek models, but the Romans gave to everything a practical direction. Law was the Roman habit, and to govern was the Roman passion. The Romans had no sooner conquered a rude tribe than they converted the territory into a new province, and gave it all the qualities of a firm part of the empire. Palestine was an integral part of the great domain, governed by Roman deputies, who were closely watched at the same time that they were entrusted with large authority. Paul, the Greek preacher, enjoyed and asserted the rights of Roman citizenship. Great highways, built at great expense for the rapid movement of armies, connected all parts of the broad territory. These made easy the rapid dissemination of the gospel. The apostles could move along these stone roads with ease, and so convert paths for soldiers into highways for the triumphant march of the messengers of the peaceful gospel. The difficulties confronting the Church throughout the Roman Empire were, however, of formidable character. The entire body of the people was hostile to any spiritual religion. What did not appeal to the senses had no attraction to them as an object of worship. The hold of the old mythology was lost, and a general skepticism as to all beliefs prevailed. But the emperors regarded the preservation of the ancestral faith as the great bulwark of the throne. Political government and fidelity to the prevailing mythology were held to be inseparable. Hence Christianity was bitterly opposed, so soon as its antagonism was discovered. It was seen to be hostile to the elaborate temple service. The emperor, who was also Pontifex Maximus, or supreme priest, was held responsible for the support of the state religion. The temples and pagan rites must be sustained. The more closely Christianity came into view, the more stringent became the measures for its suppression. The Christians made no concealments. They absented themselves from the temples, threw off all faith in the ruling mythology, and openly declared their hostility to it. When Christianity appeared, the moral depravity of the Roman Empire was at its lowest ebb. The stricter morals of the Republic had disappeared in the wild licentiousness of the empire. It was an age of excesses, which the satirists, with Juvenal and Persius at their head, held up to universal contempt. The degradation of women was complete. Even in Athens the wife was a slave, and possessed no legal rights. She could bequeath only a measure of barley to her offspring. Her present depression in Turkey is a fair picture of the old pagan conditions. Her mental endowments were declared to be of inferior grade. She was supposed to excel in duplicity and treachery. Marriage was a loose bond, with only the shadow of political institution. A low estimate was placed on childhood. In Sparta the maimed children were a burden to the state because useless as soldiers. Only boys had an importance in the eye of parents. Stealing was a virtue in a boy, provided he could do it so cleverly as not to be detected. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle never went so far as to enforce the element of religion in education. Children were not taught reverence for their parents. Jupiter, the son of Saturn, hurled his father from the throne, shut him up in Tartarus, and parcelled out the universe between himself and his two brothers, Neptune and Pluto. With this picture of filial brutality as the basis of the pagan mythology, what better estimate could be expected of childhood? All the types of parental love were based on admiration of heroic deeds. When Xenophon was told that his son had died in battle, he replied, "I did not request the gods to make my son immortal or long-lived, for it is not clear that this was suitable for him, but that he might have integrity in his principles, and be a lover of his country, and now I have my desire." Children, according to the pagan thought, were only machines for fighting future battles. Christ achieved no greater revolution than when he elevated childhood into equality with manhood. His one declaration, "Of such is the kingdom of heaven," was a fatal blow at the world's prevailing estimate of children. Slavery was universal. It underlay the whole political and social structure. In Attica, as early as B.C. 309, according to Demetrius Phalereus, there were 20,000 citizens and 400,000 slaves. Among the Romans the slaves were not regarded as persons, personae, but as things, res. The doors of the wealthy Romans were guarded by ostiarii, or slaves in chains, who lay like dogs before their kennels. When a gentleman was murdered, and his assassin could not be found, the crime was supposed to have been committed by a slave, and all the slaves, with their wives and children, were put to death, to make sure of the offender. Tacitus says that when Pedanius Secundus was murdered, as many as 400 innocent slaves were put to death. Slavery extended to all parts of the empire, and the number in Rome was constantly kept up by the inflow of captives in the wars. End of chapter 3.